Your food tastes nice.
A billionaire CEO, a food
Thank
vendor, and one dangerous secret that ties their worlds together. He thought it was attraction, until he found her name buried in his company's darkest scandal. What happens when love exposes the lie that built his fortune? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more billionaire stories that will break your heart and blow your mind. The city never sleeps. It glitters, deceives, and consumes everything beneath its lights. That Saturday, Stephen Klan, the man who owned half of downtown, stepped out of his Maybach expecting nothing new. He was the kind of billionaire who'd seen every luxury, worn every brand, eaten every dish. But fate isn't impressed by money. It hides its miracles in plain sight, sometimes behind a street cart. He came for luxury, and found something he couldn't buy. She sold food to survive, and ended up feeding a man who'd forgotten what life tastes like. The night hums. Rain blurs the skyline into streaks of silver. Inside the car, Stephen sits alone, tasting something he can't quite name. Not champagne. Not success. A memory, warm, simple, human. The scent of jollof rice. The sound of her laugh. The smile of the girl at the stall. The sound of commerce echoed through the atrium, polished shoes against marble, laughter that didn't mean happiness, and the soft chime of luxury doors opening for those who could afford to walk through them. Stephen Klan, 32, billionaire CEO of Klan Holdings, stepped out of his Bentley like a man allergic to disorder. The valet barely made eye contact before Stephen's custom-made watch caught the light, a flash of restrained arrogance. He adjusted his cufflinks, his schedule already mapped in his head. A meeting with his tailor, a brief stop at Audemars Piguet for a limited edition watch, and then lunch, alone. Always alone. But then, amid the scent of money, came something that didn't belong. It was faint at first. Smoky. Tangy. Food. He frowned. The Galleria didn't smell like food, it smelled like perfume and glass cleaner. Yet, beneath it, something real tugged at him. He followed it down a narrow service corridor, where white marble turned to gray concrete, where silence turned to life. The sound of sizzling oil. Laughter. Music from someone's old Bluetooth speaker. And then he saw her. Mary Scoff, 27, stood behind a pop-up food cart wedged between a recycling bin and a forgotten vending machine. Her apron was faded, her hands moved like she'd done this all her life, quick, precise, alive. Order up. Mac and cheese with barbecue chicken, she called out, sliding a container across to a college kid. Don't forget your drink, baby. It's free today if you smile. The kid laughed. She grinned wider. And then her eyes landed on him. For a split second, she froze, tall, broad-shouldered man in a $1,000 coat looking wildly out of place in this back alley of grease and laughter. Hey there, she said, voice steady again. You lost, or hungry? Maybe both, Stephen replied. Good answer. She turned, grabbing a paper tray. Lunch special or build your own? What's in the special? Southern-style pulled chicken, baked mac and cheese, and greens. Comfort food for people with complicated lives. He tilted his head. And if I don't have a complicated life? She smirked. Then you definitely need it. She handed him a plate. He sat, awkwardly, on a plastic stool beside a flickering neon light. You're brave, she said, watching him unbutton his suit jacket. Most guys dressed like that wouldn't eat here unless it was for a charity photo. He smiled faintly. Then maybe I'm overdue for one. She laughed, a sound that cracked something in him. He didn't remember the last time someone laughed with him, not at him. Ma'am. You can't serve here without a weekend permit. Two mall security guards approached. Mary's face drained of color. I submitted my paperwork, she said quickly, it's just delayed. Doesn't matter. Pack it up. You'll have to move. Her shoulders sank. Stephen watched her quietly reach for the napkins, the trays, her pride. Excuse me, he said calmly. She's not violating anything. She's catering for me. The guards hesitated, glancing at each other. Something in his tone carried the weight of command, that deep corporate gravity born from years of running rooms full of older men who called him sir. 5 minutes, one muttered, backing off. Mary blinked. You didn't have to do that. He shrugged. I wanted my lunch uninterrupted. Right, she said with a small laugh. You have control issues. Occupational hazard, he murmured. They sat in silence for a moment. Only the sound of wind through the alley, the hum of the city above them, and the quiet clink of his fork. He took a bite. It was smoky, sharp, unapologetic. A taste that belonged to nowhere near crystal plates or Michelin stars. It was real. He looked up at her. This is incredible. She shrugged. My mom's recipe. She always said good food fixes bad days. Does it work? He asked. Her smile faltered. Sometimes. Her phone rang. She turned away, voice dropping to a whisper. Yes, Dr. Harris. No, please, just give me 2 more days. I'm getting the money. Please don't stop treatment. A beat of silence. Then, thank you. When she turned back, her brightness was back on, like a switch. Sorry about that. You need napkins? He shook his head, his expression unreadable. She noticed. Don't look at me like that. Everybody's got something going on. He nodded slowly. You handle yours well. Comes with practice, she said, eyes glinting. The rush had ended. The last customer had gone. She was cleaning up, humming softly to herself. Stephen stood, slipping his phone into his coat. How much? $10.95, she said without looking up. He placed a $100 bill on the counter. Whoa. She blinked. That's not a tip, that's tuition. Then consider it an investment, he said. In what? In flavor. She laughed again, shaking her head. You're weird, you know that? I've been told. He started to walk away. Then her voice followed him. You didn't tell me your name. He paused. Turned back. Stephen. Stephen, she repeated, rolling the name like a taste she wasn't sure about. See you next Saturday? He hesitated. Then smiled, small, controlled, dangerous. Maybe. He came looking for luxury, and found something he couldn't buy. She sold food to survive, and ended up feeding a man who'd forgotten what life tastes like. The night hums. A billionaire stares out the window of his car, tasting something he can't quite name. Monday morning came cold and immaculate. Inside Clan Holdings, the air was sterile, a temple of glass and silence. Stephen walked into the boardroom like a machine disguised as a man. Screens flickered with profit reports and projections, voices echoing through a hollow space. He nodded, he spoke, he approved, but his mind was elsewhere. Every slide reminded him of what his life had become, numbers stacked higher than feelings, charts that meant nothing. All he saw was her. All he heard was her voice, asking, would you like to try something hot, sir? For years, he'd been chasing margins, chasing perfection, chasing ghosts. But now, for the first time in a decade, something real had broken through the noise. The week crawled by. Nights were longer than they used to be. He tried everything to forget her, buried himself in work, lifted weights until his arms ached, drank aged wine that tasted like boredom. He even searched his phone once, typed food stall by the mall, then erased it. He hated himself for caring. But obsession isn't something you choose. It chooses you, quietly, relentlessly. Saturday returned like temptation. He told himself it was coincidence when he drove back to the mall. No chauffeur this time. No suit. Just jeans, a hoodie, a cap pulled low, a billionaire pretending to be no one. He walked through the crowd, invisible for once, until the smell found him again, rich, smoky, alive. There she was. Mary. Her hands moved fast over the grill, her laugh rising above the chaos. Her apron was faded, but her smile was new every second. He stood there for a moment, watching her serve strangers with warmth he'd never received from friends. He didn't know why he felt nervous walking up to a food stall. Maybe because it was the first thing in years that made him feel human. He ordered the same meal. She didn't even notice who he was. And maybe that was the best part. He ate quietly. The food tasted the same, no, better. Less spice, more soul. Maybe she changed the recipe. Maybe he changed. He kept coming back. Every Saturday. Always the same spot, the same bowl, the same laughter waiting for him. He pretended it was about the food, but deep down he knew he was chasing her energy, her fearlessness, her life. She made the world feel less scripted. Week after week, he learned her rhythm without asking questions. The way she tied her apron before the first customer arrived. How she whispered a short prayer under her breath before opening. How her smile never quite hid the exhaustion in her eyes. He started noticing the little things. The way her hands trembled when counting change. The folded hospital receipt she kept tucked in her apron pocket. The moment she paused to stare at her phone, then shook her head like shaking off worry. He didn't know about her brother yet, the one lying in a hospital bed she could barely afford. But he could sense the fight in her, the kind of quiet resilience that doesn't beg for sympathy. Back in his penthouse, surrounded by glass and silence, he replayed the day's moments in his head like a secret film. The way she laughed. The way the world felt smaller when she was in it. He placed the leftover box on his counter. The scent filled the air. For once, his $20 million apartment didn't feel empty. He smiled without realizing. Then caught his reflection in the glass, a man who didn't know who he was anymore. He'd built an empire on logic, but this feeling, had no rules, no math. He poured himself a drink, stared at the skyline. The city was brilliant, lifeless, and infinite. He was at the top of it, and yet somehow, below her. The weeks blurred together. Stephen Klan, the ruthless CEO, vanished every weekend, disguised among ordinary people. He learned to carry boxes, to wipe down tables, to wait in line. He even helped her once when the stall got crowded. People laughed when they saw him stumble, spill sauce on his jeans. She laughed the hardest. He didn't care. In that laughter, he found freedom. Her voice stayed in his head like a song he couldn't turn off. Every smile, every sarcastic jab, every casual kindness chipped away at the walls he'd built around himself. And when she looked at him, not the billionaire, not the headline, not the myth, just him, it terrified him. Because it felt like being seen. At work, they noticed the change. He missed calls, postponed meetings, dismissed board updates like they were trivial. His assistants whispered that he'd gone soft. Investors started asking questions. He didn't care. By Friday nights, he was already restless. Saturday was his secret rebellion, his escape from the world he'd created and could no longer stand. He'd never been addicted to anything before. Now he was addicted to being human. Sometimes, he'd drive past her stall without stopping, just to see her from a distance. Sometimes, he'd park, help her close up, and walk away without saying a word. Each time, he promised himself it was the last visit. Each time, he lied. The more he tried to define what he felt, the less it made sense. It wasn't lust. It wasn't pity. It was hunger for something money couldn't serve. Late one evening, after helping her pack up, they sat on the curb outside the alley. The city murmured around them, laughter, sirens, life. She talked about dreams, about cooking, about how hope tastes like pepper stew and faith. He just listened. For once, silence didn't feel like emptiness. He didn't tell her who he was. Not yet. He wanted one place in this world where he could exist without his name. When he returned home, he didn't turn on the lights. He sat by the window, the city glowing beneath him, and whispered to no one. Maybe this is what it feels like to be alive. He came for food and found a mirror. She cooked to survive and ended up teaching him how to feel. Every Saturday became their secret story, one bowl, one smile, one quiet redemption at a time. And though neither of them knew it yet, this small alley was about to collide with the empire he'd built, and change both their worlds forever. They say curiosity is harmless, until it's not. For Steve and Clan, curiosity wasn't a hobby. It was a habit, one that built empires, and sometimes, destroyed people. But this time, it wasn't business he wanted to understand. It was her. The city stretched below him, quiet, polished, unaware. On his desk lay a single folder. Her name was printed on the top. Mary Scoff. He'd told himself he wouldn't cross the line. That he'd just be a customer, a stranger who liked her food. But that was a lie. Because the more he saw her, the more he needed to know who she was, where she came from, what she'd survived. It started small. A few background checks. A call to an old contact in human resources. A quiet search through the archives of Clan holdings. And then, the truth surfaced. A name he hadn't seen in years. Daniel Scoff. Mary's father. He had worked for Stephen's company. Loyal, disciplined, respected. Until the day an audit accused him of embezzlement, a crime that was never proven, only assumed. Stephen was younger then, colder, detached. He'd signed the dismissal letter without question. Just another executive casualty in the name of efficiency. But now, he saw the full picture. Daniel Scoff had died 2 years later, the stress, the shame, the weight of false guilt. And somewhere along that fallout, his daughter ended up behind a food stall, trying to survive. For the first time in his life, Stephen felt something unfamiliar, guilt. Not the corporate kind, the human kind. The kind that crawls under your skin and whispers, "You did this." He stared at the screen for hours. The proof was there. The real culprit had been another manager, long gone, long forgotten, quietly promoted elsewhere. The injustice was buried. And the girl who smiled every Saturday, was paying for it. He wanted to fix it. Not out of charity. Not even out of love. He just wanted to breathe again without the taste of shame. So he did what men like him always do. He used his power, quietly, strategically, invisibly. Through one of his foundations, he rerouted money into the hospital's account, enough to cover Mary's brother's medical bills. No names. No traces. Just numbers. It was supposed to be a good deed. A secret act of redemption. But the thing about secrets, is that they rot over time. At first, it felt right. Watching her smile again. Hearing her say, "My brother's getting better." Some charity stepped in. Maybe God finally answered. Stephen smiled too, but it wasn't pride he felt. It was fear. Fear that she'd find out the truth. Fear that his kindness wasn't kindness at all, just another form of control. Mary noticed things. The stranger who came every Saturday was no longer a mystery, he was a contradiction. His jeans fit too perfectly. His shoes were too expensive to be scuffed. And once, when he pulled out his wallet, she caught a glimpse of a platinum card. Her instincts whispered, "This man isn't who he says he is." But then he'd smile that quiet, almost shy smile, and her doubts would fade, if only for a moment. The air between them began to shift. Every conversation was now layered, her curiosity brushing against his guilt, her warmth pressing against his silence. He'd listened to her stories, about her brother, her dreams, her fears. And each word stabbed a little deeper, because he knew what she didn't, her pain had once been signed by his hand. He couldn't tell her. How do you confess to destroying someone's family, when you've already fallen in love with what's left of it? He told himself it didn't matter. That he'd keep helping from the shadows. That as long as she smiled, it was enough. But conscience doesn't work that way. Each visit became heavier than the last. Her laughter still made him feel alive. But now, it also reminded him how fragile the truth was. He wanted to be seen, yet couldn't risk being known. He wanted forgiveness, yet couldn't ask for it. So he lived in the space between honesty and illusion. At the office, his mind drifted during meetings. He began quietly undoing other injustices buried in his company, old cases, false terminations, ignored reports. It was as if fixing her past meant fixing himself. His assistant once asked, "Sir, why the sudden interest in employee welfare?" He just said, "It's long overdue." He told himself he was doing the right thing. But deep down, he knew the difference between doing good and playing God. He wasn't helping her because she asked. He was doing it because he couldn't stand the version of himself who'd hurt her family. And that's not compassion. That's guilt wearing a mask of generosity. Meanwhile, Mary began to wonder. Why did he always come alone? Why did he never say where he worked, or where he lived? And why did he look at her sometimes like he was holding a secret that might break them both? She tried to ignore it, but curiosity works both ways. She noticed his hands. Not the hands of a laborer or a student. Clean. Careful. Precise. The kind of hands that sign paychecks, not receipts. Once, when he reached for his phone, the screen flashed briefly, the lock screen logo of Clan Holdings. She'd seen that logo before. Printed on documents her father used to bring home. Her heart skipped. No, it couldn't be. From that day on, every smile she gave him carried a question. Every meal she served felt like a test. And every goodbye came with a flicker of doubt. Stephen noticed. He felt the shift, the subtle distance in her tone, the way she watched him now like she was piecing together a puzzle. He tried to act normal. But guilt makes even the strongest men clumsy. That night, he sat in his car, watching her from afar. Her laughter, her movements, her tired but hopeful eyes. She deserved the truth. But the truth would destroy everything he'd built between them. He wanted to protect her, and yet, protecting her meant lying to her. That's when Stephen Clan realized the cruel paradox of love. Sometimes, you hurt people not because you stop caring, but because you care too much to let them see who you really are. He thought he could rewrite the past by rewriting her future. But love built on secrets never survives the light. And as guilt turned into obsession, and compassion blurred into control. Stephen Clan, the man who fixed everything, was about to learn that some mistakes don't want redemption. They want confession. They say the truth sets you free. But what they never tell you, is that freedom often comes after destruction. For Stephen Clan, it happened on a day that was supposed to celebrate success, not expose it. It was the Clan Holdings annual renovation gala. A public relations masterpiece, cameras flashing, shareholders smiling, champagne flowing. And somewhere between the speeches and the spotlights, fate decided to show its hand. That morning, Mary was just happy. A catering company had called her last minute, an extra hand for a corporate event at the plaza. It was her biggest job yet. She didn't know whose event it was. Didn't care. She just needed the money. By noon, she stood behind a buffet table, serving rice and grilled meat to guests in tailored suits, her hands steady, her heart light. Until she heard his voice. The mic echoed. It was calm. Controlled. Familiar. She looked up, and the world stopped. There he was. Stephen. Not in jeans. Not in a cap. But in a tailored navy suit, standing beneath a banner that read Clan Holdings annual gala. Her stomach dropped. The crowd applauded. And in that applause, she heard the shattering of every Saturday they'd ever shared. Her hands trembled. The spoon she was holding clattered against the metal tray. One of her coworkers whispered, "Hey, isn't that the CEO?" Mary didn't answer. She couldn't breathe. He kept speaking, about progress, about growth, about the company's vision for the future. Every word sounded colder now. Every smile, faker. She remembered his silence. His stories. His laughter. All of it, built on a lie. When his eyes finally met hers across the crowd, time folded in on itself. Shock. Guilt. Recognition. Then panic. He tried to move toward her. But before he could speak, she dropped her gloves, stepped away from the table, and walked out, her apron still on, her heart burning. He caught up to her near the exit. No cameras. No crowd. Just silence and air too thick to breathe. Mary. She turned, eyes glistening with anger. And for the first time, the woman who once smiled at him like he was just a man, looked at him like he was a stranger. Her voice shook, but it cut deep. You lied to me. You sat at my table every week pretending to be someone else. He tried to explain that it wasn't a game, that he just wanted to feel normal, that he didn't mean for her to find out this way. But to her, it all sounded the same. Excuses. She stared at him, this man who once looked so simple in her world, now surrounded by cameras and security, dripping in power and privilege. Then she said the words that broke him, you took everything my family had. And when I was finally rebuilding, you took the only thing left, my trust. And she walked away. He didn't follow. Because for the first time in his life, Stephen Klan had no idea how to fix something. Inside, whispers spread faster than wildfire. Someone had recorded the argument, just enough to start a story. By midnight, headlines were everywhere, billionaire CEO in secret affair with street vendor. Klan Holdings boss exposed in love scandal. His PR team panicked. His board was furious. His empire was suddenly human, and that, in their world, was the worst kind of weakness. Calls flooded in. His communications director begged him to make a statement. His lawyer drafted one for him. His assistant asked if they should distance him from the girl publicly. He said nothing. Just stared at his reflection in the glass wall of his office, the reflection of a man who'd built an empire, but lost the only person who made him feel alive. He remembered every moment. Every laugh. Every lie he told himself that it didn't matter who he was when he was with her. Now he understood, it mattered more than anything. At that same moment, across town, Mary sat alone in her small apartment. The news was everywhere. His face. Her stall. Their photos together. Paparazzi outside her door. Neighbors whispering. Her brother asked if it was true, if she really knew that man on TV. She didn't answer. She just said, he's not who I thought he was. Her phone buzzed with unknown numbers, journalists offering money for interviews. Catering clients canceled their orders. Her stall, the one thing she built herself, was now a spectacle. In one day, she lost everything again. Not because of poverty, but because of love. And Stephen. He wasn't doing much better. The board demanded answers. Investors threatened to pull out. He sat through a meeting where his reputation was dissected like a case study. One director asked, how could you let yourself get involved with someone like that? Someone like that. The words made his blood boil. He stood up mid-meeting and walked out, no explanations, no apologies. Because they would never understand. They'd never tasted her food. They'd never felt what it was like to be treated like a man instead of a brand. He drove back to the alley where her stall used to be. Only darkness. The smell of smoke and metal. The echo of what used to be their secret world. He stepped out, stood there in silence, and whispered to no one. I was trying to be someone real. And I lost the only person who saw me that way. Mary didn't look back. Not that night. Not the next. She deleted his number, erased his messages, and tried to forget the man who pretended to be ordinary. But forgetting someone who changed the way you breathe, that's not easy. She'd lie awake, angry and heartbroken, and still, part of her missed the sound of his laugh. In the end, both of them were stripped bare. He lost his mask. She lost her faith. And love, the one thing that brought them together, became the reason they both fell apart. The world saw a scandal. The board saw a mistake. But only they knew what it really was, two souls from different worlds, trying to meet halfway, and breaking in the middle. Stephen Klan thought he could hide behind a name. Mary Scoff thought she could trust a stranger. Both were wrong. But sometimes, pain is the only truth strong enough to wake you up. He built an empire on lies, and lost everything that was real. When love and pride collide, something always breaks. Sometimes it's a heart. Sometimes, it's an empire. For Stephen Klan, it was both. The scandal had burned through the city like wildfire. By the time the headlines cooled, the damage was already done. Mary's stall, once alive with laughter and spice, was now just an empty space on a corner she used to call her world. The mall authorities had revoked her vendor permit. New management policies, they said. But everyone knew the truth. Corporate pressure. A name too powerful to challenge, and too dangerous to protect. She packed up what was left, 2 pots, a pan, and memories she didn't ask for. Every time she looked at the spot where Stephen used to stand, something inside her twisted. He had destroyed her peace without meaning to. And now, he was trying to rebuild it with the one thing she hated most, money. He'd tried calling. No answer. He sent messages. She deleted them. He sent people to help her set up somewhere else. She turned them away. And when he finally found the courage to go see her himself, the conversation was short. She didn't yell this time. Didn't cry. Didn't even look at him with hate. Just calm resignation. You can't buy me, Stephen. You can't fix people's lives with your money. He froze. Because that sentence, simple, brutal, honest, cut deeper than any boardroom betrayal ever could. She turned away, leaving him standing there, the billionaire with every resource in the world, and not a single thing that could bring her back. For the first time, he understood what powerlessness felt like. Not the kind that happens when you lose a deal. The kind that happens when you lose meaning. He returned to his glass tower, the one he once called home, and it felt like a cage. The board meeting was colder than usual. Whispers. Side glances. They spoke in polished sentences, but every word carried accusation. His rivals within the company had been waiting for this, the perfect scandal to dethrone the untouchable CEO. One of them smirked. Public confidence is shaken, Stephen. Investors don't like emotion. They like control. Another leaned in. Perhaps it's time you take a step back. A temporary leave. Temporary. The word hit like a verdict. He sat there, listening, watching the empire he built inch away from him. The same people who once worshipped his precision were now questioning his judgment. Because love, in their world, was a weakness. And weakness was unforgivable. When the meeting ended, he didn't argue. Didn't defend himself. He just stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out in silence. But inside, something broke. That night, he drove with no destination. Through rain, through neon lights, through streets that once felt like his kingdom. He ended up in front of her old stall again, now just an empty patch of pavement. He parked, stepped out, and stood under the drizzle. For the first time in years, he didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a man who'd lost the only thing real in his world. Across town, Mary sat by her brother's bedside. The surgery had gone well. The doctors said he'd make a full recovery. It should have been good news. But when the nurse handed her a document, the final bill marked paid in full, she froze. There was no name. Just the logo of a charity organization. But something in her gut knew. She'd seen that logo before. The same one printed on documents her father once brought home. The same foundation that was funded by Klan Holdings. Her hands trembled. Her chest tightened. Stephen. He'd done it again. She felt her gratitude turn to rage. How could he? How could he invade the one part of her life that wasn't his to touch? It wasn't kindness anymore, it was control. A man trying to erase his guilt with grand gestures, leaving her dignity as collateral damage. She left the hospital without saying a word. Her thoughts spiraled. Every conversation replayed in her head, every smile, every word, every unspoken truth. He'd known about her brother. About her father. About everything. And yet, he'd sat there every Saturday, pretending to be nobody. Pretending that what they had was real. It wasn't love. It was redemption, his, not hers. That night, Stephen waited for her outside her apartment. He didn't plan to argue. Didn't plan to justify. He just wanted her to know the truth. When she arrived, drenched and furious, she didn't even stop. Just walked past him like he was another mistake she refused to repeat. He followed quietly, his voice breaking through the rain. "I never meant to hurt you." She turned, her eyes wet, from rain or tears, he couldn't tell. "Then why does it feel like you always do?" And then, silence. She went inside. He stayed outside, letting the rain wash over him, maybe hoping it could wash away his guilt too. In the days that followed, their worlds collapsed in parallel. Mary tried to rebuild her business, selling small meals from her apartment window. Customers came, out of curiosity, out of pity, but never enough to start over. And Stephen, he fought battles behind glass walls. The boardroom was colder than ever, the whispers louder. Every mistake magnified. Every decision questioned. He was losing grip, not just on his company, but on himself. He had always believed power could fix anything. But love had exposed the truth. Power without peace is a curse. And peace without love doesn't exist. He tried one last gesture, quietly reinstating her vendor license, arranging space for her at another location. She refused it. Tore the letter apart and mailed it back to his office. No words. Just the fragments of paper inside an envelope. That night, Stephen didn't go home. He drove until the city disappeared behind him, until all that was left were open roads and silence. He pulled over, sat by the water, and watched the skyline flicker from a distance. For once, he didn't think about profits or politics. He thought about her. Her voice. Her defiance. Her truth. He realized he didn't love her because she was kind. He loved her because she was brave enough to say no. And that's how power meets its match, not in rivals or enemies, but in the quiet strength of someone who refuses to be owned. He was a man who built towers out of ego. She was a woman who built hope out of nothing. Together, they taught each other one brutal truth. Love means nothing if it costs someone their freedom. He had everything, until love forced him to face what money could never buy, humility. Every empire has its breaking point. For Stephen Clan, it came with a photograph. A single snapshot, that turned love into scandal. Billionaire CEO spotted buying food from local vendor. Romance or publicity stunt? Clan Holdings stock dips 7% after mystery woman sighting. The photo went viral overnight, Stephen in casual clothes, standing in front of a small street stall, handing a bowl of food to a smiling woman. Mary. The world saw a billionaire and a street vendor. What they didn't see was two souls trying to remember what being human felt like. The next morning, the chaos was waiting for him, inside the glass walls of his own empire. An emergency board meeting. Reporters crowding the lobby. Investors demanding answers. Stephen sat at the head of the long marble table, silent, as the people he'd built his empire with turned against him. Stephen, this has gone too far. The company's image is at stake. You need to issue a statement, something professional, something clean. They didn't say it out loud, but he knew what they meant. Distance yourself from her. Erase her from the story. Pretend she never existed. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he leaned forward, eyes cold, voice low. You want me to apologize for being human? The room fell silent. He looked around, at men and women who had built walls so high, they'd forgotten how sunlight felt. Then he said the words that would change everything. If being human costs me my title, then I was never fit to lead. By the time the meeting ended, the decision was made. He didn't wait for them to fire him. He walked out. No bodyguards. No press team. No excuses. Just a man, stripped of everything that once made him untouchable. Clan Holdings CEO steps down amid romantic scandal. Shareholders in panic after Stephen Clan resigns. Public sympathy grows for the mystery woman at the center of the storm. The media called it the billionaire's fall. But for Stephen, it felt like the first honest thing he'd done in years. He drove aimlessly through the city that night. Every billboard, every neon light, every luxury tower, they all felt foreign. He'd built this skyline. Now, it belonged to someone else. He pulled over at the same corner where he'd first met Mary. But the stall was gone. Only an oil stain on the concrete remained, and the faint smell of something that once made him believe in warmth again. Across town, Mary stood before a locked gate. A piece of paper fluttered in the wind. Unauthorized vending prohibited. Space permanently revoked. Her hands trembled as she tore it down. The same authorities who once ignored her now came in full force, shutting down the one thing she had left. She tried to argue, but the officers didn't even look at her. To them, she was just a name in a file. To her, that stall was everything. Her work. Her hope. Her identity. Gone, just like that. She stood there for hours, staring at the empty spot where her world used to live. Around her, the city kept moving, people shopping, laughing, rushing. No one noticed the woman who just lost her life's meaning. And far away, the man who once bought a bowl of jollof rice from her, was losing his own empire in parallel. Two people. Two different worlds. Both now silent. He'd lost his power. She'd lost her place. And in that silence, something shifted, something neither of them expected. Freedom. For years, Stephen had been chained to control. Every decision, every headline, every move, calculated, precise, sterile. Now, for the first time, he woke up without an agenda. He spent mornings watching sunlight hit the city skyline, not as an owner, but as a spectator. And strangely, it didn't feel so bad. Mary, on the other hand, found herself in survival mode again. She took temporary jobs, catering events, washing dishes, delivering food for others. Every night, she told her brother, "We're fine." But she wasn't fine. She felt betrayed, abandoned, and yet, she missed him. Because no matter how angry she was, Stephen's kindness, however complicated, had left something behind. A sense of being seen. He had once looked at her like she was the first real thing in his world. And even though she wanted to forget, that memory kept replaying, like a song she couldn't turn off. Meanwhile, Stephen tried to disappear. He stayed off the news, off social media. But the world didn't stop talking. Every podcast, every blog, every gossip headline, his name was everywhere. Some called him foolish. Others called him brave. But no one knew what it truly cost him. He traded an empire for a heartbeat. And yet, somehow, it felt like the first trade he didn't regret. Because when everything fell apart, the wealth, the image, the company, something strange happened. He started to feel alive again. He cooked for himself. Took walks. Watched strangers smile without wondering what they wanted from him. It was unfamiliar. Uncomfortable. And real. In a quiet part of the city, Mary began again too. She started cooking for small private clients, lawyers, teachers, newlyweds. No fancy kitchen, no stall, just a stove in her heart. The food still had the same warmth, the same story behind it. People started coming back, not because of pity, but because it tasted like hope. And though she never said it out loud, every time she stirred the pot, she thought of him. The man who ruined her life, and somehow, also saved it. Two lives that once ran on power and pride were now stripped bare, left with nothing but truth. He had fallen from the top. She had been pushed from the bottom. And yet, somehow, they'd landed in the same place, where everything fake had been burned away. Maybe that's the irony of love. It doesn't just connect people. It dismantles them, piece by piece, until what's left is something real. Stephen lost his empire. Mary lost her livelihood. But for the first time in their lives, neither of them was pretending. They were broken. They were free. And somewhere in the ruins of everything they'd lost, a new beginning was quietly waiting. Sometimes, losing everything isn't the end. It's the moment you finally become yourself. Months passed. The noise faded. The headlines moved on. But for Stephen Clan and Mary Scoff, silence wasn't peace. It was reconstruction. Somewhere in a small rented apartment, Mary stood in front of a stove that hissed like an old friend. No PR teams. No board members. No pitying glances. Just her food, and a blank page. She called it Scoff's Kitchen. Not a restaurant. Not a brand. Just a second chance built from the ashes of her first dream. At first, it was just catering small office lunches, birthday dinners, weekend family meals. One order turned into 2. 2 turned into 5. Before long, her food became a quiet rumor whispered in cafes and co-working spaces. They say the chef cooks like she's telling a story. And maybe she was. Because every dish, from her smoky grilled chicken to her spicy jollof, carried a little piece of her struggle, her resilience, her heart. Meanwhile, somewhere on the other side of the city, Stephen Clan was learning how to live without power. He'd vanished from headlines. No mansion parties. No stock briefings. No tailored suits. Just a man trying to remember who he was before money taught him to stop feeling. Under a different name, Steve Carter, he started volunteering at a culinary foundation that trained young cooks from underprivileged backgrounds. No one there knew who he was. To them, he was just a quiet man who washed dishes faster than anyone and always stayed late to clean up. At first, it was strange. He used to command boardrooms worth billions. Now, he was stacking plates and stirring soup in plastic aprons. But somehow, it felt honest. Every clang of metal. Every steam of broth. Every shared laugh among the volunteers. It softened something inside him. For years, Stephen had lived on top of the world, and yet, he'd never touched it. Now, knee-deep in reality, he began to feel its heartbeat. He watched young cooks mess up recipes, burn pans, laugh at their mistakes, and he realized, this was what success was supposed to look like. Not perfection. But passion. As weeks turned into months, Mary's small business began to bloom. Clients loved her warmth. Her food tasted like comfort in a world that had forgotten how to slow down. She'd post small updates online, nothing fancy, just photos of her meals with short captions, cooked with love. Every order matters. Still standing. Each post got a little more attention. Not viral. Just enough to keep the dream alive. And though she never mentioned his name again, there were moments, quiet, unguarded moments, when she still thought of Stephen. When she tasted a recipe that reminded her of their first meeting. When a rich customer said thank you with the same voice of authority. When she caught herself looking for a familiar face in every black car that passed her street. She hated that she missed him. But she did. Not the CEO. Not the billionaire. Just him. Stephen, too, carried her ghost. Every Saturday, he'd walk past the place where her stall once stood. It was now a sleek coffee kiosk with corporate branding and no soul. He'd stop there sometimes, not for coffee, but for the memory of a smile that once made the air taste like home. At the foundation, Stephen began mentoring students, quietly, anonymously. He never bragged, never lectured. He just asked questions that made them think. How do you want people to feel when they eat your food? What's the difference between cooking and feeding? They thought he was just a wise volunteer. They didn't know he was once the man who owned half the city's skyline. And maybe, he liked it that way. There was something freeing about being nobody. He didn't have to prove anything anymore. He didn't have to win. He just had to be. And slowly, without realizing it, the emptiness that had haunted him began to fade. Not because he'd found someone new, but because he was learning how to live with himself again. Mary's brother recovered well. He was walking again, smiling again. Sometimes, he'd sit at the counter while she cooked, teasing her. "You should start your own restaurant." And she'd laugh. "Let's not rush the universe." But deep down, she was planning something. A bigger kitchen. A nameplate. A dream she wasn't afraid to rebuild anymore. Both of them, in different cities, different kitchens, were healing in parallel. He was learning humility. She was rediscovering power. The man who once controlled everything was now learning to serve. The woman who once had nothing was learning to lead. And maybe, that's what love truly does. Not fix. Not rescue. But transform. Because sometimes, you have to lose each other, to find the parts of yourself that were missing. By the end of that winter, Scoff's kitchen had a small but loyal following. Her phone buzzed with new orders every morning. One day, she received an invitation, a catering request for an upcoming international business summit. She didn't think much of it. It was a big job, sure, but just another event. Little did she know, it would change everything again. While Stephen was teaching young cooks how to serve with heart, and Mary was preparing meals with quiet pride, the universe was already drawing their paths back together. Not through money. Not through pity. But through purpose. 2 broken lives. 2 rebuilt souls. And 1 unfinished story that was about to begin again. Because healing isn't the end of a love story. It's the bridge that leads you back to where it all began, only this time, stronger, wiser, and ready. True love doesn't always wait. Sometimes, it rebuilds, quietly, until fate decides it's time to meet again. Some stories don't end. They just wait, for the right chapter to begin again. Months after the scandal, after the silence, after the rebuilding, fate finally decided it was time. The International Business and Innovation Summit. Every name that mattered was in that room. Politicians. Investors. CEOs who spoke in billions, not sentences. And somewhere among them, Stephen Clan. He wasn't the man they remembered. No more perfectly tailored arrogance. No more rehearsed charm. Now, he stood on stage in a simple navy suit, hands steady, voice clear, speaking not about numbers, but about values. "Success isn't about how much we build," he said. "It's about what remains when everything we've built collapses." The audience applauded. But behind the polite smiles and camera flashes, Stephen felt something else, a hunger. A restlessness. Something unfinished. After his keynote, he joined the luncheon. A waiter placed a plate in front of him, steaming rice, grilled chicken glazed with honey-spiced sauce. The aroma hit him like a memory. He froze. A taste. A smell. A heartbeat from another life. He picked up the fork slowly, took a bite, and time stopped. "This," he whispered. "This tastes familiar." His pulse quickened. His eyes scanned the room. Servers in white. Guests chatting. Then, there, across the hall, her. Mary. She looked different, not the street vendor who once stood behind a food cart, but a woman who'd rebuilt her life with her own hands. Her presence was effortless. Her smile professional. But when their eyes met, everything that had been buried rose to the surface. Pain. Pride. Love. All in a single glance. He stood up. For a second, he hesitated, afraid of what he might see in her eyes if he walked closer. Then he took a breath, and went to her. Each step felt heavier than the last. Every heartbeat, a reminder of everything left unsaid. When he finally reached her, she didn't flinch. Didn't smile. Didn't even look surprised. Just calm. Controlled. Prepared. "It's been a long time, Mary. Long enough for you to learn how to eat without lying." Her words cut sharper than a knife, but there was no hatred in them. Just truth. Raw and unfiltered. He didn't defend himself. Didn't reach for an apology that wouldn't be enough. He just looked at her, the woman who'd fed him once, and somehow, fed his soul without even knowing it. "You've done well," he said quietly. "Scoff's Kitchen. I've heard of it. I'm sure your PR team keeps you updated on all your ex-mistakes. You were never a mistake, Mary." She paused. The air between them thickened. For a moment, her eyes softened, then hardened again. The conversation was civil, but their hearts weren't. Every word was a dance between restraint and confession. Between what they wanted to say, and what they still couldn't forgive. He looked at her hands. Still the same. Strong. Graceful. The hands that once cooked the meal that changed his life. And she saw a man who once symbolized everything she hated about power, now stripped of all of it. They'd both changed. But change didn't erase the past. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" she asked quietly. "Because I wanted to know what it felt like, to be liked for nothing. You could have told me the truth. And lost the only real thing I'd ever had. I was a coward, Mary." She sighed. It wasn't anger now, just the weight of everything they'd been through. He wanted to say he was sorry. That every night since, he'd thought of her. That every meal he tasted felt empty without her laughter echoing behind it. But he knew words wouldn't fix it. Only proof could. Only time could. "Chef, they're calling you to the stage for the catering award." Stephen stepped back as she smiled politely and walked toward the podium. The crowd applauded. "Our next honoree, Mary Scoff, founder of Scoff's Kitchen, for exceptional contribution to culinary innovation." Her name filled the hall. Applause echoed. And Stephen just watched. There she was. The woman the world once ignored. Now standing where the world had to listen. She gave a short speech, calm, genuine, heartfelt. She spoke about struggle, about dignity, about building something out of nothing. And though she never mentioned him, every word felt like it was aimed straight at his heart. He waited near the exit. When she walked past, he simply said, "You deserve that." She turned, looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Maybe once, I needed your approval. Not anymore." And she walked away. He didn't follow. Didn't call out. Because for the first time, he understood, love isn't always about possession. Sometimes it's about distance. Respect. Letting the other person walk free. Outside, the city lights blurred through the rain. He stood there, hands in pockets, quietly smiling to himself. Maybe this was what redemption looked like, not winning her back, but seeing her shine on her own. And though neither of them said it out loud, both knew this wasn't the end. Because when two souls are meant to meet, they always find their way back, sometimes through pain, sometimes through purpose, but always, through truth. That night, Stephen walked away from the summit alone, but lighter. He had finally seen her again. And in her eyes, he found something he didn't expect. Closure. Peace. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something new. Love doesn't always return to finish what it started. Sometimes, it comes back to remind you why it began. Some endings don't arrive with heartbreak. They arrive dressed in light, in the quiet sound of applause. Months after the summit, Stephen Clan had rebuilt his empire, but not the same way. Not through fear, or power, or control. Through purpose. Tonight, the world's eyes were on him again. Clan Holdings was launching its newest chapter, a socially responsible investment arm. A company built not just to make money, but to make meaning. But that wasn't what made tonight different. What made tonight special was who was serving the food. Scoff's Kitchen. Mary's company. Her brand. Her dream. The woman once pushed off the edge of society, now headlining the banquet for the very empire that once broke her family. Stephen had insisted, no other caterer. He didn't tell the board why. didn't explain to his investors that it wasn't just food he was after, it was redemption. When his assistant asked, "Why her?" he only said, "Because excellence doesn't ask where you're from. It asks what you've survived." Behind the scenes, Mary was composed, outwardly professional, inwardly conflicted. She had hesitated when the offer came. Working for him again? After everything? Her team convinced her to say yes. Not for emotion. For opportunity. For the people who'd believed in her. As the night unfolded, her dishes stole the show. Spiced coconut prawns. Grilled plantain canapés. Golden jollof bites with truffle-infused oil. Each bite was a story, humble roots told in the language of luxury. The elite guests, executives, investors, media heads, couldn't stop talking. They didn't see a vendor anymore. They saw a visionary. And Stephen watched quietly from a distance. She moved like confidence personified. No trace of the girl from the market stall. Only the woman who had risen from ashes, graceful, independent, untouchable. Every smile she gave her team felt like sunlight he no longer owned. And for the first time in years, he didn't want to. As the event neared its end, Stephen stepped onto the stage. The music softened. The crowd hushed. He adjusted the microphone, looking over the sea of glittering gowns and tuxedos. And then, his eyes found hers. "Tonight isn't about numbers," he began. "It's about the people who remind us what those numbers are worth." A few polite nods. Applause. Then he continued. "When I first started this company, I believed success meant control. But I was wrong. Success means connection. It means believing in people before the world does." The hall fell silent. And then he said it. "Clan Holdings will officially partner with Scoff's Kitchen as our nationwide culinary brand, not as charity, but as collaboration." The reaction was electric. Phones came up. Cameras flashed. The elite, the very people who once mocked him, were now on their feet, clapping. Mary stood frozen near the back of the hall. Her hands trembled. Her breath caught. This wasn't pity. It wasn't guilt. It was belief. She had spent years proving she didn't need saving. And tonight, she realized he finally understood that. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she didn't hide them. Not this time. Because these weren't tears of pain. They were the kind that come when someone finally sees you, fully, clearly, unapologetically. When the applause faded, Stephen stepped down from the stage. The press swarmed. The board congratulated him. But his eyes searched only for one face. He found her near the kitchen doors, standing still, holding her chef's coat like armor. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I didn't," he replied softly. "I wanted to. This changes everything." "No," he smiled faintly. "It just makes things right." They didn't need to say more. In that moment, the noise around them faded. The cameras, the crowd, the flashing lights, all disappeared. It was just them again. The man who came for luxury, and the woman who reminded him of life. When the night ended, Mary stood outside the venue, her hands tucked into her coat. The city lights glimmered like stars against the glass towers. Stephen joined her. No words. Just quiet. Then she said, "You didn't save me, Stephen." He turned, meeting her gaze. "I know," he said. "You saved me." And just like that, something shifted. Not grand. Not dramatic. Just honest. He had fallen for her strength. And she had finally forgiven his weakness. They walked away from the hall that night, not as a CEO and a food vendor, but as two people who had rebuilt themselves, and found each other again in the process. The world would call it a partnership. But deep down, they both knew it was something far greater. He came for success. She served him meaning. And together, they built something money could never buy: respect, redemption, and love. Sometimes, the real banquet isn't the one you host. It's the one where your heart finally learns how to serve. Some stories don't end with fireworks. They end in silence, in the small spaces between words, where peace finally decides to stay. It had been weeks since the banquet. The headlines had faded, the photos buried under newer scandals, newer billionaires, newer stories. But for Stephen Clan, something had changed for good. The man who once owned every luxury imaginable, now woke up in the mornings with no board meetings, no cameras, no PR filters, just a quiet sense of balance he'd never known before. And on an unusually calm Friday afternoon, the past came knocking, softly. He was sitting by the window, reading through proposals for his new venture, a foundation for ethical entrepreneurship. No power suits. No crowd. Just him, a cup of black coffee, and the slow hum of peace. Then the intercom buzzed. "Sir, there's someone here to see you." He hesitated. "Who?" The receptionist's voice softened. "She says her name is Mary Scoff." He froze. For a moment, the city outside stopped moving. Then, without answering, he stood up and walked to the door. And there she was, standing in the doorway, the light spilling behind her. No apron this time. Just a simple dress, confidence in her posture, calm in her eyes. "Mary." He smiled first. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said quietly. She returned the smile, the kind that carried both distance and familiarity. "Guess I finally found your office," she replied. "Though I preferred our old spot, next to the mall trash bins." They both laughed, lightly, but truthfully. The tension between them had dissolved, replaced by something gentler. She looked around his office, everything polished, but less cold than before. He noticed her eyes landing on the only thing that broke the monotony of glass and chrome, a framed photo of Scoff's kitchen at the banquet, her team smiling behind the buffet line. "You kept that," she said softly. "Of course," he replied. "It reminds me of what real success looks like." She walked toward the window, looking at the skyline. The city glittered like it always did, proud, expensive, untouchable. And yet, it looked different to both of them now. "You came shopping for things that shine," she said quietly. "I hope you learn that what shines brightest can't be bought." He stepped beside her, hands in his pockets, eyes still on the skyline. "I did," he said. Then turned to her. "But I also learned something else." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? What's that?" He smiled, the kind of smile that comes from somewhere real. "I didn't just buy lunch that day, Mary. I found my reason to live." The words landed softly, not dramatic, not loud, just true. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air felt still, but alive. She looked at him, really looked at him. The man who once hid behind power and titles now stood simply as Stephen. Not a CEO. Not a savior. Just a man who had finally learned how to feel. "You really changed, huh?" she said playfully. "No more tailored arrogance?" He chuckled. "I retired it. Didn't look good on me anymore." She smiled, that radiant, disarming smile he first saw by the food cart. And this time, it didn't feel like a goodbye. He poured her a cup of coffee, handed it to her, and they sat across from each other, not as CEO and vendor, not as charity and recipient, but as equals. They talked about the foundation he was building, how he planned to use his experience to mentor young entrepreneurs, especially small business owners like her. And she shared her plans for Scoff's Kitchen, expanding her catering to hospitals, schools, and creating a training program for women rebuilding their lives. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about purpose. About meaning. About becoming who they were always meant to be. The afternoon sunlight shifted across the glass. Time passed, but neither of them noticed. At one point, she leaned back, laughing softly at something he said. He couldn't help but smile, the kind of smile that happens when your heart finally forgives itself. And in that moment, the noise of the city outside faded again. No luxury, no titles, no cameras. Just two souls, finally at peace. when she stood to leave, she didn't rush this time. She didn't run. She didn't hide behind pride or pain. She simply looked at him and said, "Take care of yourself, Stephen." He nodded. "You too, Mary." And as she reached for the door, she turned one last time, her eyes soft, her smile certain. But this time, she didn't walk away. She stayed. Maybe that's what love really is. Not the fire, not the chaos, not the noise. But the quiet choice to stay, after everything has burned down and been rebuilt again. He had spent his whole life chasing value in numbers. But the day he met her, he discovered something greater than wealth. Not luxury. Not status. But peace, born from love that expected nothing in return. He came for what he thought he wanted, and found what he truly needed. Because sometimes, love doesn't change your world, it becomes it. In a world obsessed with power and perfection, the richest hearts belong to those who learn to love without price tags. In the end, power fades, money shifts, and empires fall, but love, real love, never negotiates its value. Stephen learned that the hardest way possible. What about you? Would you risk it all for something money can't buy? Tell us in the comments. And if stories of wealth, betrayal, and redemption keep you hooked, make sure to subscribe to Billionaires Enclave, where every story reminds you that even the richest hearts can still go bankrupt for love.